Hi folks, my name is Phil and welcome to Grounded, the series which looks at airlines of yesteryear. This episode will take a look at AirUK. AirUK was formed following the merger of four airlines: Air Anglia, Air Wales, British Island Airways and Air Westward. By 1979, all four airlines had come under the common ownership of British and Commonwealth Holdings. It was decided that the four airlines should be merged into a single airline, becoming the UK's third largest scheduled carrier behind British Airways and British Caledonian. The move could be considered one of the final amalgamations of the smaller British carriers. Air Anglia had formed in 1970 following the merger of three smaller companies: Anglian Air Charter, Norfolk Airways and Rig Air. The Norwich-based Air Anglia had developed quite a route network along the east coast of the United Kingdom and even had begun a service to Amsterdam and Stavanger. Air Anglia was also operating some lucrative routes that were connected to the then booming North Sea oil and gas industry. The airline operated a variety of aircraft from the tiny Piper Chieftain to the Fokker F-27 turboprop and eventually the Fokker F-28 jetliner. The airline's slogan, "Bigger than you think," really did seem to be true. Air Wales was located in, Wales, Cardiff to be precise. Founded in 1977, the airline operated a single Piper Navajo between Cardiff and Chester as part of a government-subsidised attempt at connecting the north and south of Wales. A single Embraer 110 turboprop would join the fleet in 1978 to operate from Cardiff to Brussels, hoping to pick up some connecting traffic from Sabina flights. The most notable aspect of Air Wales was that complimentary tea would be served during the flight by the first officer. They were acquired by Air Anglia in the summer of 1979. Air Westward was formed in September 1977, a subsidiary of Westward Television, the local ITV franchise for the southwest of England. You know, it's a new one for me, a television station with an airline, and not a big television station at that. Then again, just a few weeks ago I covered a furniture shop with its own airline. There's been hotels with their own airline, a restaurant with its own airline, and a paper company with an airline, so I guess why not TV as well? Air Westward were based in Exeter, still some 45 miles away from the TV headquarters in Plymouth, and operated three Cessna 404 Titan twin props with daily flights to Glasgow, Amsterdam, Paris and London Gatwick. The aircraft were painted in full Westward livery too, complete with the Golden Hind logo on the tail and Westward lettering. Air Westward would be acquired by British Island Airways in March 1979, however only the routes were part of the deal, the aircraft and staff were not. The airline was rebranded as Air West and marketed itself as both Air West or BIA Air West for the summer of 1979. British Island Airways, formerly British United Island Airways, was the sister airline to British United Airways. BUIA had been created during the reshuffle of various B&C owned airlines, mainly Jersey Airlines, Morton Air Services and British United Manx Airways. British United was sold by British and Commonwealth to Caledonian Airways to become British Caledonian, or BCAL, in 1968, though BUIA was not part of the deal and instead retained by B&C. There are certainly a lot of Bs today, but bear with me. As part of another reshuffle, on January 1st, 1979, BIA took on the scheduled operations of British Air Ferries, which had been formed through the merger of Channel Airbridge and Silver City Airways, and was previously known as British United Air Ferries until British and Commonwealth sold British United Airways to Caledonian, and I think I may be repeating myself here. So, BUA was sold by B&C to form BCAL, with both BUIA and BUAF being retained by B&C, becoming BIA and BAF respectively, with parts of BAF being absorbed by BIA in 1979. See, much clearer. BIA's main base of operations was London Gatwick, with their headquarters a few miles up the road in Red Hill. By 1979 they were operating a fleet of 2 Embraer 110s and 20 Handley Page Dart Heralds. The airline had also just introduced 4 BAC 111s, the airline's first jet aircraft. Seating 89 passengers, these jets were used on newly introduced charter flights which would take sun-seeking Brits to holiday in warmer Mediterranean resorts. The charter flying was just a small part of the business, however, with BIA operating scheduled services from airports across the UK, including Manchester, Glasgow, Newcastle and Southampton, among others. Each of the four airlines had their own part of the UK. Air Anglia had the east, Air Westward had the southwest, Air Wales had, Wales, and BIA had a bit of everything else. It was hoped that by bringing the four airlines together as one, that they could make a profitable single airline that could not only be the country's largest regional airline, but the third largest scheduled carrier in the United Kingdom, and thus AirUK was born. AirUK began operations on 16th of January 1980, taking over the existing routes, aircraft and personnel of BIA, Air Anglia, Air West and Air Wales. The combined fleet consisted of 40 aircraft, with 6 jets consisting of 4 BAC-111s from BIA and 2 Fokker F-28s from Air Anglia. The 34-strong prop fleet was made up of 18 Dart Heralds, 10 Fokker F-27s and 6 Embraer 110s. The fleet would quickly be adorned with the new AirUK logo until the livery could be fully rolled out. The livery was interesting, consisting of red, white and blue, which coincidentally are the colours of our flag. The fuselage and tail were painted blue with a red and white cheat line running below the nose and then stepping up to run through the cabin windows. It was certainly something different, though the UK Civil Aviation Authority weren't too keen on the all-over blue, claiming it could pose a safety hazard as it might not stand out against the blue sky. Someone at the CAA was under the mistaken belief that sunny days were a regular occurrence here, rather than grey and rainy, in which a bright blue aircraft would stand out better. To alleviate the CAA's concern, AirUK modified the livery so that it had a white tail and white roof, also taking the opportunity to change the shade of blue used to a darker one. AirUK was serving 33 airports, 22 across the United Kingdom and 11 overseas, with Amsterdam, Basel, Bergen, Brussels, Dublin, Dusseldorf, Le Touquet, Ostend, Paris, Rotterdam and Stavanger in service. At the time, AirUK was the first and only airline to be operating flights to all 3 of the main London airports, Heathrow, Gatwick and Stansted, as Luton was at the time primarily a holiday airport. The airline had also picked up a number of regional routes which had been dropped by British Airways, who had claimed that they were unprofitable. AirUK was serving more regional airports across the UK than any other airline, though this would come at a cost. Barely 9 months into their first year of operations, AirUK was forced to make drastic cuts as the United Kingdom itself was hit by a recession. AirUK axed several bases including Stansted, which it had inherited from Air Anglia, Bournemouth and Humberside, as well as reducing services from Southend, which had been inherited from British Air Ferries. The fleet was cut as well, with 7 Heralds and 3 Embraers being withdrawn. The 2 former Air Anglia Fokker F-28s were leased out to a French carrier as AirUK tried to standardise its fleet and reduce costs. 400 jobs were lost due to the cuts made by the company. 220 of those were a direct result of the former British Island Airways maintenance centre at Blackpool being closed in favour of retaining the Air Anglia facilities at Norwich. It was hoped that all of the cuts to the fleet, the workforce and even the route network would allow AirUK to reduce its losses and finally turn a profit. However, it was clear that there was still one more cut to be made. The BAC-111 fleet in the charter operations of AirUK was seen by AirUK's owners, British and Commonwealth, as unprofitable and a large drain on the airline's resources. B&C had planned on disposing of the charter operation early on, even going as far as forming a new subsidiary, BIA Limited, which had assumed ownership of AirUK's charter division ahead of any future sale. Peter Villa was the current managing director of AirUK. He was also the former MD of the original British Island Airways, and in early 1982 led a management buyout with the new British Island Airways officially beginning operations that April. This new airline would take the 4 BAC-111s from AirUK and would operate the remainder of that year's AirUK charter programme. The story of the second British Island Airways will be covered in a future episode, however, more changes were afoot at AirUK. Later that year, AirUK teamed up with British Midland to form Manx Airlines. British Midland would own 75% of the company, with AirUK's owners, B&C, owning the remaining 25%. Both airlines had decided to take a gamble on combining their loss-making Isle of Man routes into one operation in the hope that it would become profitable. AirUK had been doing something right, as 1983 would see the company break even for the first time since its inception 3 years earlier. With the money worries seemingly easing, AirUK went on a small expansion drive, with the airline picking up several Shorts 330 and Shorts 360 aircraft, either brand new from Shorts Brothers directly, or leased from airlines such as AirUK, Manx and Gill Airways. The airline began to phase out their final few Handley Page Heralds, replacing them with several more Fokker F-27s. These ones were the larger 500 series variants with 52 seats compared to the 44-seaters that were already in service. AirUK also hired 2 of its former BAC-111s from British Island Airways in 1985, as the airline was awarded the rights to fly from Glasgow and Newcastle to Amsterdam after they'd recently been dropped by British Caledonian. The introduction of more aircraft allowed a number of flights to be reinstated from London Stansted, as following the closure of the base in 1980, there was only a single route to Amsterdam being operated by the airline. 1987 was a very big year for AirUK, with several important changes within the company. First, there was a new livery, a predominantly white fuselage with 3 blue cheat lines running from near the front of the aircraft, heading aft and swooshing up onto the tail where they formed into a stylised Union flag. Personally, I like this livery and thought it looked very smart. Not quite as smart as a later one, but a big step up from the original. The second big change was an order for the British Aerospace BAE 146, the 4-engine regional jet with short field takeoff and landing capability. The first of these, a 200 series, was delivered in November, with 2 more scheduled to be delivered the following year. Change number 3 was the formation of AirUK Leisure, a joint venture between AirUK and Viking International. Don't worry, there were a few different Vikings, and this one wasn't connected to the former management of XL Airways. I covered that Viking way back in episode 9. Viking would provide 40% of the new venture's startup capital, with both AirUK and its parent, B&C, providing 30% each. Using a pair of 737-200s, the airline would operate charter flights on behalf of Viking and its in-house tour operator Unijet. The older Boeings were a temporary measure, with several brand new 737-400s to follow. AirUK Leisure would be the first European operator of the type when their first 737-400 GUKLA arrived on the 14th of October 1988, beating British Midland by 1 day. That British Midland 737 was GOBME, which sadly crashed less than 3 months later. The AirUK Leisure name was meant to be a provisional one, however it stuck around, with the airline beginning operations in 1988 from London Stansted, making it the first charter airline to be based there. AirUK followed its leisure division over to Stansted in early 1988, taking pride in becoming the airport's largest resident airline. The airport itself was nearing the end of a major rebuilding project costing over £400 million, and AirUK was positioning itself to take advantage of this. That is not to say that the focus had shifted entirely, as AirUK would begin operating flights from Gatwick to both Glasgow and Edinburgh for winter 1988. The airline had picked up the route licences which had been dropped following British Airways' takeover of British Caledonian the year before. AirUK planned on operating up to 7 daily flights each way, so ordered 4 of the larger BAE 146-300s to facilitate this. An additional 200 series arrived in late 1988 as well, though this came second hand from Pacific Southwest Airlines in the US. As the next decade approached, trouble was brewing behind the scenes. AirUK itself was in a fairly good state and had a lot to look forward to. It was its parent company that was heading for the rocks. British and Commonwealth, which had moved away from its roots in the shipping industry in favour of financial services, had begun to collapse. B&C acquired Atlantic Computers in 1988 for the princely sum of £434 million. Atlantic, founded in 1975, had specialised in leasing computer equipment to businesses. Shortly after the acquisition, it was discovered that someone had been cooking the books and that Atlantic had never turned a profit. B&C was forced to write off £550 million and found itself buckling under debts of nearly £1 billion. In June 1990, British and Commonwealth was forced into administration, and just to show how much of a mess was left behind, 30 years later, at the end of 2020, the company was still in the process of administration. The disaster that was unfolding at B&C didn't have much of an immediate impact on AirUK. A couple of years earlier it had been placed into a holding group, the AirUK Group, itself part of British Air Transport Holdings as part of a B&C reshuffle. The Dutch flag carrier KLM had acquired a 14.9% stake in the company in 1987 and gained a seat on the company's board of directors. KLM had actually wanted a larger stake in the company, however, at the time it wasn't possible due to foreign ownership rules. They did, however, provide British Air Transport Holdings several loans, which were in turn secured against the remaining 85.1% of AirUK's shares. What this meant, aside from KLM unofficially having control of the company, was that AirUK could continue to operate despite the collapse of British and Commonwealth. A much bigger problem was on the horizon, however. AirUK had beefed up its operations at Stansted with the introduction of several new international routes. It had established itself as the dominant carrier at Stansted, itself ready to become London's third airport. With an influx of long-haul airlines expected, AirUK was in prime position to capitalise on connecting traffic and maybe even form an alliance with one or two. The logic here was that London's 2 major airports, Heathrow and Gatwick, were incredibly congested. Aside from being very expensive, slots at the 2 airports were very hard to come by, making it harder for airlines to add new routes or improve frequencies. The new facilities at Stansted were state-of-the-art at the time and really did make the airport an attractive and realistic alternative. Unfortunately, timing is everything, and just like 10 years prior when AirUK had the misfortune of launching just before a recession, their focusing on Stansted was just before a much worse recession. While AirUK would come through relatively unscathed, several airlines folded, including Air Europe, which was Gatwick's largest operator. Suddenly, 1/5 of Gatwick slots were now available to anyone who wanted them, or, given the recession, any airline willing to gamble on them. Other airlines axed routes to Heathrow, freeing up some of those lucrative slots as well. In the end, only one long-haul airline would fly to Stansted. American Airlines introduced a daily service from Chicago with a 767 in 1992. The airline lost over $10 million on the route, which struggled to achieve decent load factors and was axed the following year. With no major international airline to partner with, or even feed off with connecting passengers, AirUK was in danger of slipping away from being the third force that it had aspired to, although the phrase was a bit outdated, given that BCAL had been merged into BA by now. British Midland was considered by many to be the second carrier, especially after Dan Air had also been absorbed into British Airways, though that is a story for another day. AirUK plodded on, however, and even added a few more BAE 146s to the fleet. On the subject of the Whisperjet fleet, you may have noticed that most of them have odd registrations that are not in any particular order. This is because AirUK, like several airlines at the time, would use aircraft registrations to give a nod to individuals, usually employees or directors. AirUK also introduced a new aircraft type to their fleet, the Dutch-made Fokker 100 jet. 5 of these arrived in 1992, having come via the bankrupt Canadian airline Inter. 4 more would join the fleet in 1993, having previously been with Air Europe, whose demise 2 years earlier had caused the previously mentioned Stansted predicament. The introduction of these new Fokker jets coincided with a new livery for AirUK. It really suited the Fokker 100, and personally I think it looked very professional and classy. 9 Fokker 50 turboprops were acquired, with 8 arriving during 1994. These were brought in to replace the Fokker F-27 fleet, which had started to be rather troublesome. Despite some reliability problems, I should mention that AirUK were well known for professional and very friendly crews, to the point where some folks would insist on travelling with them over a comparatively more reliable carrier. Spring 1994 would see flights from Stansted to Munich and Copenhagen, along with Milan Linate from that September. November would see AirUK operate flights from Manchester to Amsterdam, having picked up the route dropped by KLM. 1995 would see AirUK turn a profit for the first time in a number of years, making a net profit just shy of £2.8 million. Flights from Stansted to Hamburg, Zurich and Madrid were launched, as well as increasing the frequency of flights to Milan. The 2 remaining Shorts 360s were sold on, and another Fokker 50 was delivered, taking the fleet to 9 aircraft. AirUK had finally standardised its fleet. The turboprop fleet consisted of 9 Fokker 50s, with the jet fleet being split between the Fokker 100 and BAE 146, though the Whisperjet fleet was split between several variants. Things were really beginning to look up for AirUK. It had survived the recession and not just made a sizable profit, but also managed it with just a 55% load factor. The company began an in-depth strategic review called The Future is Ours, which looked at the current position in the industry, the challenges it faced, and the choices it could make to develop into a bigger and stronger airline. 1996 would be another profitable year for AirUK, making a net profit of just over £2.7 million. Despite this, some routes underperformed considerably. Flights to Madrid and Nice were axed, and the Zurich flight saw an equipment change. A Dornier 328 was hired in from Suckling Airways, initially in a white livery, but eventually fitted out in the full AirUK livery. The 328 was smaller and cheaper to operate than the 4-engine BAE 146 that was used on the Zurich flight, and it was hoped that by using the smaller aircraft, the route could be made profitable and thus retained. AirUK had also established itself as the leading airline from the United Kingdom to Amsterdam, with flights from 15 airports following the introduction of service from London City Airport. London City also saw the introduction of flights to Edinburgh after they were switched over from Gatwick following increased competition from BA. The charter arm, AirUK Leisure, was sold off during the course of the year to Unijet. Unijet were of course Viking International, who had since taken on the name of their established in-house tour operator. The airline would become Leisure International Airways, a name that was already familiar to some as it had been in use by AirUK Leisure since 1993, when it had begun long-haul charter operations. Their newfound independence would be short-lived, however, as Unijet would be acquired by First Choice Holidays the following year. Leisure International would be absorbed into Air 2000 shortly after that. The full story of Leisure International will be covered in another episode that's coming soon. AirUK inherited 7 Boeing 737-400s from Leisure International, which had begun to replace them with 3 Airbus A320s ahead of Leisure's sale to Unijet. Incidentally, the 3 A320s were all picked up from Excalibur Airways, which, following its own buyout, was ditching its A320 fleet in favour of a DC-10. I actually covered the Excalibur story in my first ever episode of Grounded, so you can pretty much guess how well that new fleet strategy went. Anyway, where was I? AirUK wouldn't use these 737s, however, instead sending 4 over to KLM, its partner, and 3 went to an airline called Modiluft over in India. Modiluft had fallen out with its business partner, the German flag carrier Lufthansa, and as a result its fleet was grounded. AirUK provided 3 aircraft and then found themselves in the same situation as Lufthansa, with its aircraft impounded in India. AirUK said in its 1996 director's report that the traumatic experience which has arisen for us and others in connection with repossessing aircraft leased to operations in India who get into financial difficulties has proved extremely serious with no easy means of remedy, adding that the Indian government needs to be mindful of this if it seeks to develop its international trade. Harsh words indeed, but also rather true with regard to doing business on the international stage. A similar situation had previously arisen between a British and American carrier, in which US law prevented the British airline from repossessing its aircraft, leading to its own demise. That story's for another day, however. In the end, it cost AirUK around £4.5 million to recover these impounded 737s from India. On December 1st, 1997, KLM acquired AirUK outright. The airline had already been building up stock in the company by converting its outstanding loans to shares. This was a long time in the making. KLM had been making moves for years but was prevented by the then existing foreign ownership laws. As the European aviation industry was opened up in the mid to late 90s, it became possible for KLM to finally acquire its partner, and now it would only be a matter of time before the inevitable. Barely a month later, on January 1st, 1998, AirUK was rebranded as KLM UK. The Fokker F-27s were replaced by new ATR 72s. They'd been ordered back in October when it was still AirUK. The new turboprops would all arrive in the KLM UK livery, itself a carbon copy of the existing KLM livery, with just UK added behind the letters KLM on the fuselage. I think the ATR fleet would have looked good in the AirUK livery. That's not an insult to the KLM livery, of course. It's smart, but now AirUK's entire identity was shrunk down to just 2 letters on someone else's existing livery. AirUK Limited officially became KLM UK Limited on the 26th of March 1999. Shortly afterward, the company began to be broken up. Buzz was established in 1999 with operations beginning on January 4th, 2000. Intended to be a low-cost rival to that of EasyJet, Ryanair and GoFly, Buzz would initially operate some leased Boeing 737s as well as several BAE 146s drafted in from KLM UK. The UK to Amsterdam routes were all retained by KLM UK, whilst the rest of the route network was either axed or palmed off to Buzz. What was once AirUK was now in its final phase. On the 31st of October 2002, the Amsterdam operations of KLM UK were transferred to KLM Cityhopper UK, a new subsidiary of KLM, and will be merged into KLM Cityhopper in 2003. On the 11th of April 2003, the majority of what was left of KLM UK was sold to Buzz Stansted Limited for just over €20 million. Buzz Stansted Limited was a holding company established by Ryanair specifically for the takeover. Buzz would cease operations at the end of 2004, with its flying programme transferred to Ryanair. The story of Buzz will be covered in due course. However, in 2019 the Buzz brand was revived by Ryanair as the airline began to move away from a single airline brand. Following the breakup, KLM UK, which was now little more than a shell, was used to handle aircraft leases, mainly to sublease the BAE 146s to Buzz and later CityJet, though they were eventually disposed of. The company, now trading under the name KLM Amsterdam, also leased some Fokker 50s to VLM, the Belgian airline with a similar name. As of the end of 2020, the company is still in business, now named Aircraft Capital Leasing A Limited, and that is where this story ends. So, what went wrong? The ultimate answer is that nothing really went wrong, and that it was simply acquired by another airline, divided up and either sold off or absorbed into the parent's operations. Of course, had some things gone differently, then AirUK might still be around today, maybe even the second carrier that we need. The formation of AirUK was itself an attempt at turning 4 loss-making airlines into a successful larger one. It did make sense. By bringing the 4 airlines together as one, AirUK could streamline the operation, removing unnecessary duplication of routes or operational expenses, as well as benefit from the economy of scale. A larger airline would, in theory, be a profitable one, and while AirUK hit trouble pretty much from the beginning, it was down to unfortunate timing with the recession. The airline not only weathered the storm, but also began to make a tidy profit, albeit after closing a maintenance base and making job losses. Timing was again a problem a decade later. AirUK had made a fairly logical move to London Stansted, ready to capitalise on the new terminal facilities and the resultant long-haul flights with their subsequent connecting traffic. The plan fell apart though through no fault of their own. The country hit another, even bigger recession, but the collapse of Air Europe, who were Gatwick's biggest user, meant that Gatwick now had plenty of spare slots available. The two combined to pretty much ensure that no long-haul airline would use Stansted for many years, by which point AirUK had gone. AirUK didn't roll over and die, however. Instead, they defiantly boosted operations and even had a few very profitable years afterwards. These profitable years didn't last, however. AirUK lost over 9.6 million in 1997, 1.9 million in 1998, 6.3 million in the year 2000, and an eye-watering £16.8 million in 2001. To be fair, some of the losses were a direct result of the Indian 737 lease debacle, and the later losses seemed to be a result of splitting AirUK up into KLM UK and Buzz. AirUK's focus on routes to Amsterdam is what made them a takeover target for KLM. AirUK were for several years the biggest foreign operator at Schiphol Airport. The two also had a long-standing partnership going right back to the days of Air Anglia. KLM had supported AirUK throughout its existence by providing bank loans secured against shares, even getting a seat on the board of directors, being able to influence the company direction. They were a good fit in that regard, and a merger would have been pretty inevitable. I do wonder what would have happened had KLM not broken the company up. AirUK was the largest regional airline in the country with a great reputation for friendly crews and quality service. I used to think that British Midland would have been an ideal partner during a merger which, if bankrolled by KLM, might just have given us a true national rival to British Airways. Oh, what could have been. Until next time, thanks for watching.